This is the art history book that my parents got me when I was in high school, and especially growing up somewhere that was rural and I didn't have a lot of internet access, it was like my first experience with nudity and like where I was getting a lot of my ideas about the world. I grew up being told that blue is like one of the last colors named in civilizations, and like the reason that in the Iliad and the Odyssey it says like the wine dark sea instead of like the blue sea is because they didn't have a word for blue yet, and it wasn't even like in their mindset yet. But there's this blue hippo from ancient Egypt where they love blue and had lapis lazuli, and they also like made their own like synthetic blue. This hippo's made from faience, which is like kind of like an all-in-one like glaze and clay that's like a mixture of copper and lime and like other stuff that's like the material that you sculpt, and then when you fire it, like the copper and other chemicals like rise to the surface and like make the blue like glassy layer on the outside. And I also love that they painted these flowers and plants onto the hippo that would have been in their environment, and just like the idea of like having your habitat like painted onto you is like really beautiful. The bully thing fresco has this like beautiful blue background that I love, but the stories that I learned about this fresco actually have to do with like the skin tone of the figures rather than the color blue. And I was taught that the figure in the middle that's upside down is a man because he would be outside getting tan, doing manly things, while the figures on either side have paler skin because they were women that would be covered up more and indoors. And this theory was developed by a British archaeologist who died in 1941 named Sir Arthur Evans. And it's actually not really it's more based on his culture than Minoan culture, which turns out was probably a matriarchy with women participating equally in all aspects of life. The Virgin Mary is always painted wearing blue because ultramarine was like a really rare and precious color, so it was associated with holiness. The Virgin Mary was like seen as like a passive figure that was like very submissive to God and like did what she was supposed to do. And blue is seen at the time as like a very like passive color and like a calm color, whereas red and pink were both seen as like passionate, assertive colors like for men. Two paintings are responsible for reversing the gender color stereotypes to what they are today. The paintings are Pinky and the Blue Boy. Even though they're painted in different eras and by different artists, the same millionaire bought them, and when he hung them together, people just looked up to him way too much and started associating pink with girls and blue with boys. In the Blue Boy, they used chiaroscuro to highlight the boy's face using like really dramatic lighting and making everything else around him darker. And they do a similar thing with Pinky. Even though she's like against clouds, they make the clouds darker than her dress and her skin, and it brings your eye to her. Even though if you saw her in real life like this, she would be backlit. At the same time, there's beginning to be a shift from clothes being handmade to being mass-produced in factories. Factories are playing around with gender coding clothes by color as sort of like a part of their branding. When I was babysitting Penny, we were playing with brown and pink Play-Doh, and her neighbor, that's like an old white lady, saw us, and she told Penny that brown was a gross color and took the brown Play-Doh away and replaced it with another shade of pink. And then like a few days later, I was babysitting her, and she asked to see me with my glasses off, and she like told me my eyes were beautiful, like blue and orange. And I told her that her brown eyes were beautiful too, and she goes, "No, brown's a poopy color." Yves Klein is probably like my nemesis, even though we both love blue. Yves Klein claimed that his first monochrome was the blue sky, and he also invented his own shade of blue, which was really just ultramarine with a different binder, which he called International Klein Blue, and he patented it. And for one performance, he had an orchestra play the same note for 20 minutes and then have 20 minutes of silence while he had women cover themselves in International Climb Blue. And then he used them as human paintbrushes, like positioning them and dragging them along the ground. Pamela Rosenkrantz made this series of paintings called Sexual Power while she was on Viagra. They all turned out these like very fleshy skin tone colors, and she made the paintings in the gallery and just like laid down this like clear plastic to catch any drips. But like my sexuality is not like a industrial plastic wraps vibe, so I did mine on the porch. And I don't have Viagra, so I just use blue tinted glasses because I read that Viagra heightens your perception of the color blue. And it was really hard to mix up tones that matched my skin color. Her work to me is really about like her sexuality not being considered in painting or in art history. It made me like think, did I really like see myself in art history or when I was in high school, or was I just like looking for something that wasn't really there and I needed it to be? I had to look outside my art history book to find Faith Ringgold's work. She's an artist from the Harlem Renaissance. She makes these story quilts that are painted and fabric and have like narrative along the outside. Instead of relying on chiaroscuro or value to create focus in the work, she uses a lot of saturated, rich colors that sort of play off each other. Her work moves beyond just reacting to being excluded to envisioning a magical world and a powerful little girl who flies over the bridge, which becomes her necklace, and flies over the Union Building so that her dad can finally join.